get in.
Did you get in, Nina?
I think they.
Did you get in? Did you get into the network?
And Montana? No, but no, I figured it out.
Get into this.
Did I go this Saturday?
That's why I got in.
Thanks, Tom.
There you go.
All right, let's try.
Jim had me typing in about everything in the free world. But
What?
yeah, you did.
I did what? Oh, I know.
Cindy, she knew right away.
Hey, I'm not too bad. I don't know all the passwords in the district. I was sort of
All right.
surprised mine opened right up.
Okay, we don't have Michael here, but we have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and start.
He told me he was. You know what? Maybe he told me he had his board. Maybe he has his quarterly board meeting.
We're going to call our meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. Vicki, if we could begin with roll call, please.
Here.
Michael Lord, Jessica Lyons,
Here.
Garcia,
Here.
Mike Burbick,
Here.
Casey Williams.
Here.
Would everyone stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? Our flag is right over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hi, Michael. We're going to move into the public recognition part of our meeting, and we are giving a special presentation for all the work that Dan Kenny does in leading this committee for our district. And I'm going to let Jim make a few comments as well. But when Dan sent his report talking about the energy savings that they've been able to do not only this past year, but since this has been a district initiative since 2005, is really really tremendous. Just a couple of the numbers. In the 2011-12 school year, we saved $153,700 in savings over the previous year. Since 2005, the total is $1,186,000. And these are just through the initiatives that this committee is doing by going green in more areas. And we haven't reached our goal yet, but Dan, according to your report, we're above where we need to be by 2015. So if Jim, you want to add any comments before I hand this to Dan?
Yeah, I have to tell you, it's been a privilege for me. I got to know Dan right away when I arrived 4 years ago, and he's just been someone that goes beyond the call of teaching. In addition to being an outstanding teacher in the classroom, the kids and the teachers love him, but he does so much for this district, and he's so humble and quiet about it. And this is just one of those where he does his due diligence. I mean, during times we're supposed to be shut down, he makes sure we're shut down. He'll do random checks of buildings, computer labs, lights. But I don't know if you're aware of it. He's not getting honored for this tonight, but he's the integral part of all the school gardens that were put up at all of our elementary schools, and it's been amazing the produce they got out of those gardens, and they're donating that food to local pantries for people that are in need. So he does a lot for the community and district, and I could go on, but I'm just very proud that he's here tonight and we're recognizing him.
So we'd like to recognize Dan Kenny, our district energy savings facilitator, for his leadership in our energy savings program, which has resulted in substantial cost savings for our district. Dan, thank you very much. Okay, now we move on to comments, public comments. Do we have any, Vicki? Okay. So you have to kind of bear with us a little bit. This is our first meeting with board docs.
It is
And
interesting.
I didn't move it fast enough, so I already logged out. But
Here, Phil.
no, I'm not cheating. I'm not cheating. Not cheating.
We'll all be looking at that, Tracy.
Next, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Briscoe to introduce Dr. Alfred Tatum, who the board contracted to do some work with us in a literary audit. So, Dr. Briscoe.
Yes. First of all, it's an honor for me to introduce Dr. Tatum. I don't know if very many people are aware of how renowned he is in literacy and working with youth throughout the whole country, I think, even across the world. And so he's finishing his second book, and the Board of Education had as one of their goals and one of their topics, if you recall, looking at our achievement gap audit. And our Board of Education said, let's quit talking about it and let's get an expert in who understands this, and let's audit our district to find out what our strengths and our weaknesses are and bring us back recommendations. And I've had an opportunity with a small group of our leaders at the central office, Tom and Dr. Tatum, to sit down, and I can tell you that I concur wholeheartedly what he's going to share with you tonight. And he has some excellent recommendations, and we are already in the process of taking his recommendations and working with our team. We'll be working with our literacy coordinator, our assistant superintendent for curriculum, and a team of people to come up with a consistent recommendations to our school improvement planning process in our district to incorporate some of the recommendations that he has. So with that, I'm proud to introduce Dr. Tatum, one of our DeKalb residents and renowned author.
All right, sounds good. I don't know if that's a good place for me to stand. I don't want my back to you, but I want to
Speak to the audience. We have.
Good evening. I'm just going to provide a roadmap. I was charged by the board to investigate the reading achievement gap across all of the 8 schools with the team from UIC. And we had an opportunity to visit each school, observations, and it was quite telling. One of the things that I mentioned, I was really concerned about figuring out why is there an achievement gap between the low-performing students in the district and the high-performing students. And there was some interest in looking at it from a racialized lens, so I took that into the audit. I'm going to provide a quick summary, one that I provided to the board, and I think you have a copy of this, and then I can go in more detail about some of the major aspects that I found related to the gap K-12. I mean, there were some specific things to elementary, middle, and high, but I had to look across K-12 in terms of the recommendations that I'm providing. But I can speak clearly to what happens at each of the particular levels. Just to start off, I provided this audit to really focus on the reading-related and writing-related instructional practices and non-instructional practices that may be contributing to the gap. I didn't go in initially looking at writing. I was only paying attention to reading, but early on in the observations, I began to notice something that was taking place with writing, so that shaped my lens throughout the rest of the audit. And I have to say, it was really wonderful having an opportunity to observe the teachers and students in DeKalb schools. And the board was exemplary. They provided me with all of the documents that I requested. They provided them in a very timely manner. And it's important to notice that the communication was always transparent. So if I said something to the principal or the superintendent, everyone was part of the communication. So there was nothing that was part of a hidden agenda. And I really appreciated that because we were all moving in the same direction. I looked at a large number of data sources, enough to fill up the back of an SUV. But the key sources that I really want to pay attention to, I observed 104 classrooms, K through 12. DeKalb schools have data team meetings where all of the principals come together with teachers and discuss the data in terms of figuring out what to do. I attended 3 data team meetings. I had 12 focus groups at the middle school and high schools with 104 middle and high school students, very diverse group of students. I administered surveys to determine how the students feel about the curriculum at the high school level. There were 938 surveys, and I input all of that data and analyzed it. The teachers provided 108 sample of their instructional material. So when we observed the classrooms, I wanted to go away with the instructional material so that I can analyze that in terms of what I had for the observations. And then I assessed 47 middle school students, 47 fifth grade students in 2 elementary schools. Because I found that the reading growth becomes flat near 4th and 5th grade. So I wanted to get a sense of the entry point for those kids going into middle schools, and we had 2 schools with different demographic profiles just to hand score all of these assessments and make better sense of what's actually taking place with those assessments. I also looked at some initial survey data. There's a diversity and inclusion staff survey because there was an interest in the racialized achievement gap. So I wanted to see what the district was doing and how they were moving forward, and all of the other assessment data that is available on the websites. A couple of key things that were really important. I wanted to assess the school climate. I wanted to assess the quality of education in DeKalb. And as I did that, I really looked at how the high-performing students feel in this district compared to the low-performing students in this district. So those were some of the major goals of my data collection. One of the things that became very, very clear when I talked about the district climate, and at some point there will be a long report that's provided or uploaded or
It'll be made
something.
public.
So you'll have all the details in terms of all of this stuff. But I quickly found out that in DeKalb school district, there are some underlying variables that have an adverse effect on student achievement. And all of the focus group students, middle school and high school students, said there is differential treatment in DeKalb public schools. And the differential treatment is between the high-performing students and the low-performing students. That suggests that if you're a low-performing student in this district, it's going to be very difficult to move you back up to a level of high performance, and a lot of it's based on some of the school-wide dispositions. Now, depending on where you are in the district, it doesn't matter if you're an African-American student, Latino student, or white student, that becomes true for all students. But what tends to happen, you have a higher percentage of African-American students who and Latino students, because of language and vocabulary related issues, who come in somewhat further behind. But the good news about DeKalb Public Schools, the longer you're in the district, the better reader and writer you become. So that is true from kindergarten up to 5th grade, and then it levels off for all students. So depending on how far you move up to 5th grade, that's when you begin to see the flattening gap, and then you see a differential between your low-performing students and high-performing students. And that's one of the things that the district is having difficulty wrestling with. And I believe I observed or figured out why that is the case. And so what I found out is the differential treatment is aligned with students' academic performance more than any other factors, race or gender. But the school district is making investing a great deal of energy to close the gap. So there is clear evidence about a significant investment. I cannot tell you how many human resources and structural supports are in place across K-12. So when you see that, we can feel really good about what's actually taking place in the district. But I'm beginning concerned, so you have all of the human resources, adults, teaching aides in schools, you have these support structures, reading classes, courses for students who need some form of remediation, but we're still not able to move the needle as fast as it needs to be moved. So I was particularly concerned about why that was the case, and I began to investigate some reasons for that. This is all the good news. Also, this is what really made it puzzling. You have all of this investment of resources, human, and the teachers, in most cases, have accepted the district recommended practices. So whatever's coming from the board or the superintendent or the assistant superintendent, teachers are in line with it. There's not a great deal of resistance. And I that in most of the observations, and a large, 62% of the classroom observations, that's 62% of 104 classroom observations, the district recommended mandates are moving forward, all right? So all of this is relatively good news. But then when I began to look at the instruction, this is when the barriers started emerging. Close look at the instructions. And it's not as if the teachers didn't have high expectations, or they were not working, or they were not standing in front of the students. One of the things that I found out is the vision for reading is more anchored in skills and strategies and the pacing guides, but this can fail to capture students' reading behaviors. And what I mean by that, it's very difficult to interrupt students from handling text independently. So I'll just use a reading term very quickly. If the pacing guide says we want our kids to make inferences, you may see teachers focus on inferences. But what you don't capture is why a student cannot make inferences. Some of it can be attributed to the fact that he has difficulty decoding. That's one area. Or difficulty with vocabulary, or a poor concept of reading. So the instructional practices are not clearly targeting those three different profiles. Does that make, are you with me with that? And so this is the case where you can have instruction taking place, but it's missing the mark unless we strengthen our assessment profiles of those students who are having the greater amount of difficulty. The other thing, when I looked at the primary grades, it's very clear they've adopted a reading program. It's called Reading Street. It's a respected program. It's research-based. But some of the scripted lessons in the primary grades were not necessarily aligned with the students' reading and writing needs. Again, you can miss the mark, although you have a quality program that's been adopted by the board. And this will have huge implications in terms of moving forward with beginning to address the needs of all the students, particularly the ones who struggle the most. And one of the things that I found as a good reader and writer, as I sat in the classrooms, the focus of the lessons were oftentimes unclear. And that is extremely problematic if we're trying to address the needs of struggling readers and writers. And one of the things in terms of me observing that, the students in the focus groups would say the same thing. I don't get clear explanations. I really don't know what I need to focus on. Or the pacing is missing the mark. And that makes it very difficult by the time you get to middle school and high school. In some ways, that can lead to this differential treatment. There's a weak assessment profile. The district has a lot of assessment data. At the district level and at the school level, but now we have to figure out how to translate that to classroom practices. And what does that actually really mean for that? For example, I want to be very specific here. If I told you that 75% of the students, if I told you 25% of the students had difficulty with reading comprehension, that means absolutely nothing. We can chart the percentages up, but unless I go under the hood and tell you why those 20% are having difficulty, you can have 6 or 7 different profiles of difficulty. So we have some data that indicates the overall performance, but the data are not clear in terms of the individual strengths and weaknesses of a particular student that can be addressed. This is huge. Particularly, there's a trajectory from kindergarten through 12th grade language and vocabulary, but there's no clearly defined approach to language or vocabulary development, or I didn't observe it during the 3 months of the assessment. So there's a random quality, and I'm not sure how teachers are anchoring their instructional behaviors, particularly as it relates to language and vocabulary. It's very uneven. Now here's the difference. In kindergarten through 3rd grade, or kindergarten through 2nd grade, your language difference does not create a wide enough gap because the texts simply aren't that difficult. But as you move to middle school and high school, there's an increased demand on vocabulary and the gap begins to widen. So if you don't address that earlier, and it can go undetected and unnoticed because if I have a high vocabulary, it doesn't place me at an advantage in kindergarten because of the types of text that I'm reading. But if I have a strong vocabulary, it places me at advantage by the 5th grade. So that's why you begin to see progress throughout, and then it begins to level off. And even for our high-performing students, they're not shooting up this way, they're still traveling horizontally, which is a major concern. I only observed explicit reading instruction in about 1/3 of the classroom observations, where there was a clear focus on helping you become better readers and writers. In other cases, there was a clear focus on discussing different types of text. And many of the middle school and high school students, when asked, what is taking place to help you become an excellent reader and excellent writer, some of them said there's nothing taking place to help you become an excellent reader and excellent writer. In many cases, I am on my own. But again, you're at an advantage if you already read well. You're at a disadvantage if you are a struggling reader or writer. I mean, these are things that can be addressed. And the thing that concerned me most, this is a district that does not write. There's very little writing taking place. And that's going to be really, really important as we begin to move forward. We only observed writing in 6 out of 121 observations, or 5% of the observations. That was quite frightening, because writing allows you to exercise some of your intellect in very different ways that reading does not. And you can hide reading difficulties, but you can't hide writing difficulties. It'll give you a very different assessment profile. And that was really a troubling observation as we moved through the audit. And again, I didn't go in looking for writing, but it just became very noticeable through these observations. Then I looked at, I gave you a summary slide that deals with literacy achievement, race, and economics. Again, if you look at race and economics entering DeKalb public schools, there's a wide gap. There's a differential. But the longer students are in that district, the better they perform. High expectations, high demands for all students in the district. The district has been intentional and systematic with its data analysis, with a particular focus on closing the reading achievement gap between students who meet, and I want to read this because it's important. A particular focus on closing the reading achievement gap between students who meet or exceed state standards on reading assessments and students who do not meet. But the district, however, has to be careful to avoid viewing the gap along racial lines, because it can lead to instructional practices or placements that neglect high-performing students across ethnicities and income levels, or deflect attention from addressing the literacy needs of white students who are struggling with reading and writing in the district. And when I looked at, we would expect this in this district to have more white students in the remedial reading class, because they're a larger number. But we have a large number of white students who are also underperforming in the district, and they can fly under the radar if we particularly look at it along a racialized lens. We also have high-performing African-American Latino students who are not receiving some supports, because that's true of meeting all of our high-performing students. If you think about meeting national norms, DeKalb School District does a very good job of reading. But in terms of exceeding national norms, none of our students are exceeding national norms. A very small percentage. I think in all cases, it was less than 5% across ethnicities. And that's somewhat problematic for that. And that's why I interviewed the high-performing, the low-performing, and the middle-of-the-road students. So what are some major findings? And I was very reluctant to use this word, but I couldn't find a better word to use. Because it does not capture the good intentions or the effort or the resources and the investment to take place. But somehow it seems like the roles of reading and writing have been poorly conceptualized in this district. We don't have strong barometers of excellence. What do we expect our students to be able to do other than meet national norms, which does not tell us much in terms of shaping assessments in different types of indicators. And I think that can be overlooked if you have a district that has roughly 82%, in some cases, some schools performing above grade level, or meeting national norms, but the district's goal was that 93% of the students meet national norms. And with the way it's being conceptualized now, I think we're in danger of not meeting that particular goal for a lot of reasons. The second major issue was, I think the conceptual framework of literacy provided by the district and the pacing guides lead to instructional practices and assessment profiles that do not align with students' reading related strengths and weaknesses. So we have the data, but it's not aligned with their particular needs. I cannot take any of the data charts as a teacher and go in and know what I need to do for my students. I just know they were underperforming. And if that's true of me as a teacher and educator, I suspect it may be true of some of the other teachers in our district, although we're having these conversations. But there's a way to make that conversation more robust if we begin to look at that, and I got some specific recommendations. Writing is neglected throughout the district. Major concern. And then the data-driven practices, although they're robust, needs to be strengthened if we're going to hit the mark with both our low-performing readers and our high-performing readers. And then I gave 7 key recommendations. And these are district-wide recommendations. Some of them will be different from school to school because you can't make the same recommendation for an elementary school that you can make for a high school. It's very different. Elementary schools are not dealing or focusing on curriculum orientation to become engaged with text, but that's important in middle school and high school. That's an example of what I mean. You can't make similar recommendations. But 7 key recommendations. One was, I'm hoping that the district finds a way to articulate a stronger conceptualization of literacy instruction throughout the district that anchors what we need to do and not just focus on percentages and increase those different percentages. For example, you have teachers saying, we need to do this for the ACT, or we need to do this for the PSAE. That's not why we read and write for the ACT or the PSAE. If you have excellent reading and writing behaviors, then you perform well on those particular assessments, all right? It's important, if we're gonna shape a trajectory, we have to establish a clearly defined approach for language and vocabulary development. That's absolutely essential. I think it was a travesty in one kindergarten classroom. Some of them still on alphabetic knowledge in March, on the 19th letter. That cannot happen in this district. That should not happen. If you're still in alphabetic knowledge, inevitably, you're gonna have a gap moving towards 1st grade, 2nd grade, and 3rd grade. And there's no way we can slow walk our kids through language and vocabulary development at that particular pace. But this was a data-driven practice. It was progress. Well, the last meeting was 15, and now it's 19. That's not progress in March, right? But again, you can be, so I talk about some of those particular examples, but my major concern, where you begin to see race and economics, the fact that they had 19 letters was attributed to how the student entered the school. Now, you can have students enter the school at different levels, and then that's something that you can attribute to the home. But by the 7th month of the school year, it's no longer a home issue, it's a school issue, right? And so how do we begin to address that? The other thing is, the 3rd recommendation was strengthen the assessment profiles of students reading and writing at the classroom and school level. I mean, there are ways to do this. Make writing central to the district goals. Here's another key thing that will come out in the longer report. There's focus on skill and reading and writing in some cases, but there wasn't a true focus on nurturing the intellectual development of our students in this district in those classrooms. So I'll give you an example from a middle school student to help you understand. He said, I can answer all of the questions on the end of the unit test, which is an assessment. And then he said, but I'm not getting smart about anything. That's a problem. And that's what I mean by there's a skill and strategy focus. So as we play the increase the reading and writing score game, are we nurturing the intellectual development of all of our particular students? And that's what I mean by a stronger conceptualization. And that was from one of our high-performing students. They were questioning the materials and why they were reading what they were reading. So the recommendation I made is how do we integrate reading, writing, and knowledge development? And I made some suggestions for that. We have to strengthen the curriculum or examine ways to engage the middle and high school students with the existing curriculum. I conducted a survey to see if students were finding the text meaningful. On a scale of 5, I think it was 1.4. That was the average, 1.4 of the students are finding the text meaningful. And I broke it down by different items. Now, the reason I did that, I wanted to see, are white students finding text more meaningful than our African-American students or our Latino students? And that wasn't the case. I want to also determine, as an economic indicator, if students from single-parent households, two-parent households were finding text more meaningful than parents from, students from single-parent households. That wasn't the case. So there were ways to look at these economic indicators. I also want to determine if the girls were finding the text more meaningful than the boys. What we found in a lot of cases that many of our students are not finding the text meaningful. That leads to levels of disengagement. That has grade point average implications, but not necessarily reading and writing implications. But one of the recommendations from the students was we need to examine the middle school and the high school curriculum. They said freshman year is awful, sophomore year gets better because you have more choices. So you'll see some of that stuff come out of the recommendations. The other one was some energy was invested in creating pacing and instructional documents that teachers should follow. I think there's a need to revise the pacing and instructional documents so that a focus on excellent reading and excellent writing behaviors is clear, and not the pacing guide governing the instructional practices. Again, one student mentioned to me, he said that writing is squeezed out by the pacing guides. Now, I don't know how we know there's a pacing guide in the district, but somehow that's an example of the language that's being used, and the students are picking up on that particular language. So they're very candid about those particular pieces. And then the last thing that I don't have in front of you, when I looked at the reading of the 5th grade students of two schools, one of our higher performing schools and one of our lower performing schools, which means they weren't at 80%, but they were over 70%. But comparatively, that's a lower performing school in DeKalb with the different demographics. And when I looked at how well the low performing, average, and high performing students were responding to assessment items, a close analysis indicated that they're all having difficulty with the same types of items. But you can overlook that if you look at their scores and how they're performing well. So that's all part of the larger audit. I mean, I think there's work to do. There's a lot of good stuff taking place, but somehow we're missing the mark. And this really begs for leadership, really rethinking what reading and writing looks like in this district, because from my observations suggest that teachers are going to move forward with these district recommended practices and really figure a way to retool the assessment so that we're not missing the mark with our students. So I'll stop there. And
at this point, I'd like to ask board members if you have specific questions of Dr. Tatum.
I have
sure.
a comment more than a question, Dr. Tatum. Just within this past year, the district's writing committee has been disbanded. Do you think that's probably a bad idea? The committee used to get together, they would present the DeKalb writing project, students would write according to a prompt, and then teachers would get together and calibrate.
Yeah. I think it's much larger than that. I think writing becomes reduced to activities and not become an integral part of the curriculum. So there should be evidence during each lesson that there is writing, reading, and intellectual development involved. And I made that clear in the large report. But if writing becomes tangential and add-on and not central, I have to find the time for it. And if other things are competing, writing is going to be the first thing that we squeeze out. And that's problematic, particularly with the shift towards career and college readiness. If our students are not writing well by the time they leave DeKalb School District, it's not going to be because we attribute to the fact that we don't have the writing committee or the National Reading Project. It's going to be attributed to the fact that we did not make it central and we don't have clear indicators of writing excellence for students in our district. And that's in my humble opinion.
Okay, if I may just follow up on that.
Sure.
I noticed, in the larger audit, you mentioned that many students didn't recognize they were doing writing because they were doing content area writing, not just in their language arts classes. But you noticed that as well when you were doing all of your observations, the
Yeah.
lack of writing?
I think that's a mischaracterization. What students were saying, not writing in the content areas, they said most of my writing is taking notes in content area classrooms. That's very different from writing in the content areas. Writing in the content areas, I'm making sense of the content with my pen. as opposed to I'm taking notes in a content area classroom.
Okay.
And that doesn't require a cognitive demand to simply take notes. But I'll also tell you why it's important, because you raised this issue. At the high school level, many students had difficulty taking notes, but it was attributed to spelling. So if I can't hear these words and write them down, even though we can mandate that you take notes, it's going to catch up with you. And I was extremely dismayed. I simply asked many of the fifth grade students to describe your ethnicity as part of the assessment. It wasn't a writing gauge, but our students had difficulty if they were African American, spelling African American, spelling Latino, and spelling Caucasian. In some cases, they had difficulty spelling white. Now, that's a primary word. So, if you don't have writing, and that's larger than the writing project, that was, I can't capture the thoughts that my teachers are actually sharing, but that's not attributed to your reading and writing performance. That's going to be attributed to your grade point average, because it's going to affect what you study and what you have in front of you. So it has to be a centralized feature, K through 12, that goes beyond a particular writing committee.
Dr. Tatum, question. I mean, one of the reasons we did this is the feel that we have to make it better for every student.
Sure.
And I mean, if you look at our scores on average, we compare pretty similarly most of the districts around us.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at test scores.
Sure.
Would you say this is a problem that's unique to DeKalb based on, I guess, our style and what's been adopted here, or is this more of a national trend?
I think districts.
Not saying that that's right, but I'm
Yeah.
just your opinion on that.
I think it's more of a national trend. I think there have been so many shifts in education over the past 10 years. Levels of accountability, different mandates, and every school district has to make sense or interpret those mandates for their particular district. Sometimes there's a focus on, let's go for the low-hanging fruit and let's focus on the things that we can handle and the things that are research-based, which is characteristic of this particular district, or it can be attributed to a different vision that goes beyond those particular types of mandates. So in some ways, it's quite similar to what's happening nationally. And I think that could be attributed to the fact how we conceptualize reading and writing in the district, connected to assessment indicators, as opposed to thinking about reading and writing, what are those excellent behaviors that we expect K through 12.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a different type of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Tracy?
Yes.
Dr. Tatum, first, and I mentioned this in private, but for those of us that are laymen and not educators, I appreciated the way you wrote this. I want to say that again because it made it easy to follow for those of us that aren't in this profession. But you had I guess the thing I really appreciated the most was we do spend a ton of money on data team meetings, all this effort, and we would see continual graphs of year-over-year improvement, yet our gap never closes. And I think we got to the crux of that. So thank you for that. And I know Dr. Briscoe and Dr. Muller are already spoken with you, and there's starting to be some progress in this area. The question becomes, is there similar districts out there tackling a problem? Are there good templates or examples we can draw from that have gone through this process and have made progress so that we don't have to reinvent everything, I guess is?
No, I don't think there's a reinventing. Comparatively, the school district is ahead of the curve. You have the structures in place, you have the data already there. That was a conscious decision on someone's part to actually move forward with that. It's just a matter of professional development in this district, not a model that you can follow from someone else, school district. And it's not a major leap in terms of where you are. I don't, for each of you, I created a checklist in terms of the level of success in terms of where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Moving toward data analysis for this district is not a major leap with the investment that you have. It's just having the professional development. With one of your principals, as I said in the data team meeting, I'm looking at this beautiful data. And how they were discussing it, I said I wanted to scream, right? And I approached the principal after this to have the conversation. And she said, what did you mean? But it wasn't as an observer, I couldn't intervene. But after we had that initial conversation, I said, this is the type of conversation you should have been having about your data. For example, one of the things, there were data team meetings without students' artifacts. Students' work in front of them. You can't look at a number and determine how to support a student if you don't have their work in front of them. Because 2 students scoring at the 70% percentile is very different. They have very different profiles. So it looks like, yeah, this student is doing really well. But again, if I don't have that in front of you, that's a small leap. But it'll make a huge difference. And it's having those types of conversations. And even having the right questions to ask about the data.
No, I won't.
Thank
Not
you.
who's doing well, who's not doing well.
Jessica?
So you're ahead of, yes.
As I was looking through the data and, in your report, what I was finding a lot, I know you spoke about school climate, but the nurturing of it, like you stated before, about doing the data. When you do look at data, you're missing sometimes that EQ piece or the social piece of that, qualitative data then, because you are missing that piece.
Sure.
Do you find that we do need to work on our school climate? Because I know you talked about the differences, the comments that were being made from the students, not being able to articulate based on pacing guides as opposed to the nurturing piece and things like that. Is that something that you definitely strongly recommend we work on that?
Yeah, one thing I did not share with you, we have a pile of observation notes and we scribbled fiercely. And one of the things we were looking at was the qualitative data. So we looked at the climate. I was observing how teachers interact with students. I was observing how they interact with students across different ethnic groups, the African American children, Latino children, and the white children. But overall, the climate here was positive. I mean, there was a Latino student who says, I hate these teachers. They, tell me to speak Spanish when I'm only talking about sports. And he said that in a focus group meeting, but that wasn't a thing that was spread out through the entire district. Overall, a lot of the African American students, Latino students, and white students had positive responses. Now, one thing they mentioned that didn't come out of the report is, you have high demand teachers in the district, but you don't have great motivators. So, but I don't know if that's attributed to students underperforming or not performing. So you're just not going to see that. But that's happening for all of the students in a particular district. But the difference is it's just differential treatment. So if you have a high performing African American student or Latino student, they're admitting that they're getting better treatment than an African American, Latino, white student who's low performing. So those factors come out, and that's why I was trying to be very clear that it's the academic performance more than any of the other factors. Now, if you have a larger number of students with academic performance across ethnic groups, then it's going to affect them disproportionately. But it wasn't because of level of ethnicity. And teachers were very supportive, they wanted to support who's taking advantage. Now, one thing that was qualitative piece that didn't come out, particularly for your low performing students, a lot of students in the district are afraid to ask questions. Now, I don't, there's a level of intimidation, particularly by the time you get to middle school and high school. And that came across different ethnicities. So I'm not certain why, some students are intimidated by asking particular types of questions for students. But again, K-12, that's not the case. That's more of the middle and the high school.
Mike?
I just want to thank you for your exceptional work, Dr. Tatum, and I would like to see Dr. Tatum and his team back in 2 years, or at least at a minimum. I don't know what would be an appropriate time to take another look at how we're moving along and review our activities in regard to your recommendations. So thank you.
I think, go ahead.
I have one more. Dr. Tatum, I'm looking at, like you said, it sounds like professional development more than anything. Is your team, do they do that, or is it just an assessment piece?
Well, No,
I think
yes.
it's Doug's good people.
Folks are coming from Chicago. I'm the only one who lives in DeKalb. And, you know, in terms of my time, that's squeezed very, very thin for that. I mean, but that's a possibility. But it's only going to be around the large issues that make sense. I think your key issues, data, what does that look like, and some of the other issues, but not in terms of instructional practices. The teaching wasn't a problem.
Right.
But it's those cornerstone or signature pieces that I think beg some form of consideration that I think it's worthwhile moving towards. So.
Dr. Briscoe?
Yeah, I first of all, I'm really impressed with the report and the amount of work you did and how we pushed you, because I know it was late. You and I talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it just is so valuable. I knew it was critical we had this report now. And the reason that having this report now and the recommendations now is there's a brand new school improvement process that completely holds our district, our principals, our teachers accountable. Every piece of the evaluation's tied to accountability now. And so the next steps would be that we have met with Dr. Tatum a couple times now, but we'll put a team of our literacy coordinator, Dr. Moeller, our assistant superintendent for curriculum, will lead that team. And I would ask for, hopefully we can get at least, if you have time, at least one more meeting after we decipher the recommendations. The idea would be that before individual schools meet with their school improvement planning teams, because it is this big picture and because this concept of looking at literacy, writing, to encompass even the intellectual part of it, the content part of it, to come up with a concept that we can do across the district, because like Dr. Tatum said, we have right now the data teaming in place. So we have the infrastructure to make this happen. And so my idealistic situation would be that each school improvement planning team would take and include a piece of this that we feel could move our district forward and address a couple of those major issues with the writing and the intellectual piece of it, to combine with what we're doing with literacy. So we need to work on that in the next few weeks, come back to our principals and our leadership teams, ask them to incorporate at least one or two goals in their school improvement planning process, and it would be consistent across the district. That's what's critical to me, is that one building takes it on and the other one doesn't. It needs to be consistent in order to have an impact on the whole district.
And then that aligns the district with the emergence of the Common Core state standards. It's something that they've been calling for, and that's what, as I was mentioning, you're close to being there. So you're ahead of the curve in a lot of places. I mean, there are other qualitative issues at the primary grade level that were different. I mean, the last comment, I was trying to see at some point you have Latino students begin to outperform African American students, but there's a different culture in kindergarten and first grade for Latino students and African American students, because they rally around language, which is so. I mean, that's other stuff, but that's not a district-wide something that takes place.
And I would take Mike Verbeck's comment a little bit further. We talked about maybe having you come back in 2 years, see how we're doing. I think once Dr. Moeller and his team come up with recommendations that tie into some of the needs that Dr. Tatum talked about, that's reported to the board regularly. So we have an understanding that this isn't just something that's going to get put on a shelf, and that we actually implement it. And it becomes part of the policy of District 428. So.
2 years is a great time. My son will be a senior then.
And not Mike.
Dr. Tatum, obviously we're going to be making changes in our district following your recommendations you've got in here. Help us understand, what is an expected time frame for us to start seeing results in our kids and our students and the data we get from them?
I think that's part of the assessment piece. I think if you start rallying around what I would recommend is a common assessment profile and how we're moving forward with instruction, you can begin to see growth, incremental growth, starting next year. Now, how far and how fast? Language and vocabulary is a very different something. But in your middle grades and your upper grades, you'll begin to see differences right away. That's another thing. please don't plan a 5-year, that's what school district, a 5-year timeline. It doesn't take that long based on where you are. Instructionally, you can start seeing some results, and your data team, that's part of your data team. Where are our results right now, and how are we beginning to move forward? If you're not seeing the results immediately, then we're doing something wrong.
Good. Dr. Tatum, I want to thank you for your time and your report, and it just, to me, reinforces, don't mind to minimize this, but the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Yeah, because I do think that we have talked a lot about our math challenges in this district, but from my understanding, you will have a difficult time conceptualizing math issues unless you haven't first developed your reading and your writing skills. So I think these things really flow together very well with what we're trying to accomplish. So,
Sounds good.
thank you. Join me in thanking Dr. Tatum. Okay, we'll move on with our. At this point, really, we really don't open that part up to the public. But I think if you have questions that you want to bring back to the board, or if you want to talk to Dr. Tatum after the meeting, I think Dr. Tatum will be here. So, okay.
Tom, can I also go for principals? Because I know some of the principals are in the room. I would like to hear your comments based on his report. Like, what do you think and how you gauge what you read would be interesting. So I guess if you could email me, I would like to know. It's not a command or anything else if you want to.
Okay, we'll get back to our regular agenda.
I got one right here.
No, I know. I know. Okay, we are now going to move on to our non-business consent agenda. And the first thing that we will need to do is to, it's been asked that, now I'm really messed up here.
Minutes.
Right. Have it here. Okay, it's been recommended that the Board of Education approve the non-business consent agenda, items A and B.
So moved. Second.
A second? Roll call, please.
David Montana,
Yes.
Michael Ward,
Yes.
Jessica Lyons,
Yes.
Tom Kia,
Yes.
Mike Irvin.
Yes.
Tracy White.
Yes.
Okay, we would like to make comment that one of the items that we did approve is new employees. And Dr. Briscoe, if you'd like to introduce one of our new Dean of Students.
Yes. Did Tamara just? Okay. We just hired Dean Aaron Osborne. If you could take just a few minutes and tell everyone where you're from and what you've been up to. And
I am living in Aurora, but past 7 years I've been working for an organization, Special Education Services, which is part of Men's Group. So I have a pretty strong special education background. I've been a principal for the past 2 years at one of our schools, and I've worked with some people in DeKalb, some students. I'm very excited by the opportunity to join you guys and be a dean at the high school here. And I'm thankful for the opportunity.
welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is the Business and Finance part of our meeting, approval of the tentative 2012-13 budget for public display. This will not be approved formally until our September 18th meeting, but we are required under law that this be publicly on display for 30 days at least prior to approval. It's been recommended that the Board of Education approve the tentative 2012-13 budget for public display in anticipation of adoption on September 18th, 2012.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Before we vote on this, I would like Andrea to make a presentation to the board.
You know what? Have you been able to open up the motion?
We have, from the last
Trying to
meeting, we
open
have
up the
some
motion.
updates on here. And tonight, what you're going to see is the budget in its entirety. Previously, we were looking at the budget with the operating funds, but this evening, the full budget is here for display, and as stated, this will be accessible for the next 30 days before we actually vote on it for adoption. And again, just to remind ourselves of what a budget is. Again, this is just a plan, and we all know that plans can change, and especially in a $66 million budget. We use this budget as a tool for our projection model, so as we work with those projections, we're actually building 5 years of budgets moving forward. We place in here estimates for our revenues and then estimates on what we intend to spend for our expenditures. And then on the next slide, we have a little bit just about the accounting functions that go into this, meaning the modified accrual. And what that means again is that year end, throughout the year, month to month, we're dealing with our finances on a cash basis. At year end though, we shore up our revenues and expenditures, meaning that while we have some folks who are 9-month employees, our teachers and assistants, they are paid throughout the year, however. But come June, the end of June, even though they're not paid or they haven't received their paycheck for July and August, all of that is accrued and expended in that year so that we see a true picture of what those expenses are. Also on the revenues, everybody's received their property tax bills in May and June, and as that revenue comes in, we actually take that and we push it to the next fiscal year. So in May and June, for the fiscal 12 year, when we actually receive the money, we record that as cash, but we defer the revenue to the following fiscal year, this 13 fiscal year. So we know absolutely how much in revenue our tax levy is going to garner us. And then the next component of our budget building process is just when we build a calendar and the board formally adopts that calendar, when we start getting input from our staff, when we do the tax levy and all of that in April, when we receive the final extension so we know what those dollars look like. In May and June, we do the presentations. June and July, we give you the updates. And then July and August is when we finalize this, and September is a public hearing. And then moving forward, and I know this is very tiny for all of you, but looking at the board docs, you can see this, and this is just a reminder again of what the budget reductions have been in the previous year to meet the board goals of striving for a balanced budget. So in 2009-10, we had identified $2.757 million of budget reductions. In 2010 and 11, we identified $2.5 million and moved forward with all of these. In 2011 and 2012, actually, if you take the $400,000 projected adjustment for the health expense and then the staggered transportation and the food service reduction, it was $900,000 that we had identified. However, as always, we get a curveball thrown at us, and general state aid was taken down. And then we did have to hire an additional security assistant and a teacher. And again, that happens every year depending on how many students come in different grade levels. We may need to add an additional teacher or 2 or 3 at different times. And then moving forward, because of all those reductions, as I promised last month, we have done some great things here as well. So we also need to celebrate the creative ways we have infused some new things into our budget. Because although we're always struggling to identify areas of reductions, we do take a look at reallocating those dollars so that we can do some other things. And part of that is a restructuring plan at the high school, which is ongoing. Instructional coaches were added at the high school. We have a freshman experience. Because of this new beautiful building, there are some additional opportunities with childcare and preschool programs. There's a career tech education with state-of-the-art equipment in there. Coaches have been hired all-day kindergarten. We are in our second year of that district-wide, which not very many districts could say that they have that throughout their school district, and we have been able to do that. Again, the pre-K program, the web program, which was introduced this year to transition our 5th graders into middle school. Infusing technology. Although we've said we have drastically cut that budget, we do have to say a great thank you to grants that have been written for our school district and our PTA and PTO supports, because we've been able to purchase laptops, iPads, smart boards, desktop computers, and smart response systems district-wide for us. So that has been a tremendous help for us. We have an ombudsman program. STAR tutoring, which the NIU students come and assist our students in tutoring with cross-content area. Intro to Algebra AB will be introduced. And then as far as for our athletics and music, we've added bass fishing, boys bowling, gymnastics, and steel drums. So there are some great things other than constantly talking about reductions that we've done, and just to remind everybody again that these great things have been included in our budget. Then as far as the building that we are sitting in today, again, we owe a great thank you to our communities of DeKalb, Portland, and Village, and Malta for passing this referendum to get us to this new school, as well as Portland Elementary. But in this building, also we need to remember the enhancements that have been put into place. And I won't read through all of these, but you can see from playing fields to competition and running tracks, to greenhouse, to dance studios, to an ample-sized cafeteria to hold all of our students for breakfast and lunch, to state-of-the-art industrial center, computer labs, digital photography. All these great things have been placed in this building. And then moving forward, again, like I said, the Cortland Elementary building. Huntley Middle School was repurposed, and we spent $4 million on the items listed, from air conditioning in all of our classroom, reconditioned swimming pools, locker upgrades, the secured entryways, which we know it has been actually an issue throughout our district, and we are slowly but surely getting that corrected at all of our buildings. At Founders, we've spent $2 million on adding kindergarten classrooms, again, secured entryway, playground equipment, bathrooms. And then at Clinton Rosette, this was outside of the referendum, we did do a secured entryway at that building as well. Now, last month we reviewed this next slide, so I won't read through here again, but it's just a reminder, chronicling from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, how these numbers keep moving, and we keep chasing them, trying to make adjustments accordingly to mitigate the revenue and expense difference here and close that gap. However, after 3 years of all those reductions, we all recognize the fact this is going to become more and more difficult, because there's not many things that you can start chomping away at once we get to this point. Now on the next slide, again, shows all of our funds. What was absent at the last presentation that is now incorporated into here is the debt fund, the capital projects fund, and the life safety. Now the debt fund, when we look at all these revenues, again, every fund is listed accordingly to how the state requires us to build our budget, with identifying our local sources, state, federal, and then any other source. So you'll see that for each fund. The debt fund, again, just to remind everybody, that is the bond fund. So we issued the referendum bonds. We levy for those bonds, and it goes into a restricted fund to make payment on those bonds. So you'll see that debt fund. Then down lower, you'll see a capital projects fund. And again, the little $1,000 in there is actually the only interest that we earn, which becomes unfortunate, because besides all of these expenses increasing as we've seen, one thing that we've really seen that has shrunk is interest earnings. So you're sitting on all this money, however, there's not a lot of opportunity to earn interest on any of these things. So we're just allocating $1,000, saying that we'd earn some interest there. Working cash fund, only about $4,000. Life safety fund, $150. Hardly worth mentioning, but that is what we are all feeling. Again, the pie of how the revenue is received locally, and again, that's through our taxpayers. Corporate property replacement tax and fees account for $46 million of the total operating funds. State sources is $17 million, and again, that's made up of general state aid, which is approximately $10 million of that $17 million. Transportation that we receive reimbursement from the state is about $2.3 million. Pre-K grant money, we receive about $600,000, and then there's some additional special ed reimbursement that goes in there. Federal sources at the $3.4 million is our title grants, the federal lunch program that we run, and IDEA money. So as far as operating, that's the way it looks. Expenditure-wise, again, all funds are listed here. And again, according to how we have to break these down or categorize as objects. So for each fund, you'll see salaries, benefits, a purchase service line, materials, capital, and other. Under the debt fund, again, I will draw your attention to that payment of principal and interest is paid by the revenue side of which we levy for. So that's the restricted fund, as well as IMRF, capital projects, and life safety. And then the next slide breaks down our expenditures for us, which you have seen. Of course, our salaries and benefits take up about 76% of our total operating expenditures. Our purchase services is about $10.3 million, which are food service, transportation, district-wide liability insurance, special ed, hearing and occupational therapy, and then our phone, sanitation, water, and sewer comes out of there. Materials, of course, are cleaning materials, gas, electric, textbooks, and of course, classroom supplies. Capital outlay, again, when you look at a $69 million budget, there's very little money left there to appropriate for capital. But that's our roof replacements, any bathroom updates that we need to do, and equipment purchases. The other line item, again, is tuition, and those are for our special ed students that are sent outside of the district for services. The next slide just breaks down, again, the revenues and expenditures, and we're facing a $2.6 million deficit operationally. Then total is $3.9 million, but again, that bottom portion, the debt service and capital and life safety, is also a timing. So that we're not so concerned with, because it's money that has come in previous years, and then when we allocate the money to actually be spent. So there's, in capital projects funds, about $1 million left, and that's basically furniture, fixtures, and equipment money from referendum dollars that have yet been spent. So that tips the scale a little bit in that picture. The next slide actually places our beginning fund balances. So if you take that estimated beginning fund balance, you add in the revenues, subtract out your expenditures, becomes your deficit, and then what we anticipate those ending fund balances to be. Now, again, this is the operating funds without the $21 million of grant money. So we just wanted to keep an eye on, had we not received that money, and looking at operationally what our future looks like. That's what you see in front of you here. And then the next slide will show you when we add in that money that has yet to be allocated and identified for how we're going to place that permanently is on this next slide. So you're seeing really that we have a $29 million fund balance, $23.5 million if you look at operational dollars. And again, the FFAC committee is studying these numbers to make a recommendation to the school board on how we are to allocate that $21.156 million for future years. And then the next slide at least gives you a pictorial view for those who don't like looking at all the numbers like we enjoy doing. But an easier scale to take a look at is from year to year, and we have a historical perspective of here of the bars with revenues and expenditures. And then the red line is our fund balance. Now, you can see we have been fortunate enough to keep that line steady from 2006 on, and actually even prior to that, by making all of these adjustments. The struggle is in the future. Of course, we are seeing our revenues being squeezed, and the expenditures are outpacing those revenues. So we're getting to the point where we are tipping into that fund balance reserve to make up that difference. However, this slide again excludes with the construction money. The next slide will incorporate all of that construction money in there, and just giving you a look ahead of, again, even though there's large money sitting there in that construction money, though, you can still see it is eroding those fund balances moving forward. Any questions?
Questions for Andrea? So I think just to be clear, I mean, the 2.6 million is comparable, very similar to what we saw a month ago. And I think the key thing that Andrea keeps emphasizing is what our fund reserve is without the grant money, because the board gave direction to the FFAC to look at using those monies to bring equality to our schools and to look at how we can use that money to help us save money in the future. So, and if you look at where our reserves are going, it falls behind the standard that the board has set to have 15% fund balance for our reserves. So that's why that's such a critical issue. Any comments before we go to a roll call? Mike?
Well, it's just that the deficit is alarming, and I think moving forward in the future, how do we determine what is living within our means? And I think we really need to start looking at what that looks like in the future. What can we really afford year to year?
Other comments? Questions? Roll call?
Michael Ward,
Yes.
Jessica Lyons,
Yes.
Tom Teal,
Yes.
Mike Rivett,
Yes.
Tracy Williams,
Yes.
Amina Fontana.
Yes.
Motion passes tentatively until we see it again in September. The next item on our business and finance is discussion information item on the two-way radio communication. This is Andrea and Tammy are presenting this.
Back in 2009, we opened up Portland. We found that we were having some difficulties with our radio communications. And we approached it in a way that we knew that we had poor communication with Portland. It was inconsistent. With the opening of the new high school, we determined that we were going to be needing some new radios compared to what we're currently being used with the ICOM analog radio. So the investigation started. We talked to many vendors. It was recommended that we talk to the city of DeKalb and the police department to go find out their needs of radio communication, and it was encouraged that we do pursue the same type of radios that are used by the city. So we brought in some vendors, and we ended up going with the same vendor that provides the city of DeKalb, the police department, with their radios. And in 2011, in April 2011, the board did approve us purchasing 100 motor turbo radios, which are the ones that are used for daily communications, and 50 Starcom radios, which are the crisis radios that are used by the police department and would unfortunately be used by us in the event of a state or local crisis, so city type crisis, not specifically just to the school. And so purchases were made. Through the implementation process, some issues were identified that were not clear to us at the time of purchase. And we were still having to use the old ICOM radios. Those are the old analog radios. At most of the schools, or at all the schools except the high school. And they still do communicate with the motor turbos. Our vendor was able to reprogram those old ICOMs so they could still communicate. The problem we're running into is we are now getting to a point that the FCC, we knew this was coming, the FCC has mandated that we can no longer use wideband frequency as of January 1st, 2013. We've known about this since 2004 when the mandate came down. What that basically means to us is that we are going to be having to replace or find another means of communication than the old ICOM radios that are used throughout the district. The high school is all in the motor turbos. That's not an issue. But all the rest of the schools use the ICOMs for their support staff, their playground staff, their bus monitors, their assistants, their special ed classrooms, those type of radios. We have about, I'm guessing, about 150 to 175 of those throughout the district. We are going to have to replace them. If those radios are used after December 31st, just keyed up, there's a $7,000 penalty per transmission that we could potentially be fined for using those radios. So this is something that we have to do. So what we've done, was talking with Andrea, we've decided to develop a committee, which includes Connie Roman, myself, and Brian Tobin. And over the next several months, we're going to be interviewing different radio vendors, including the one we currently use, which, just for everyone's information, has been sold. Chris Davis, who was the previous owner, has retired and sold his business to a company out of Decatur. I don't know much about this company at this point. We still have the same service and service our radios and have done a good job for us up to this point for that standpoint. So we'll be interviewing many different vendors at that time and looking at different types of radios that can work with our current repeaters, with our current motor turbos. Connie, and with Connie's help, we're going to be meeting with all of the principals and many administrators to determine how many radios are really needed in each building. This past year, we've given out a lot of the ICOMs because we had them before the motor turbos were put in place. But we need everyone to kind of take a step back and evaluate how many do you really need in your building? Do you need to have 5 out on the playground at all times? Or can there be one person who is the central radio person in the event that there's a transmission that needs to be made to the office or to the other end? Those are some of the meetings that we're going to be taking place, as well as do we need to have as many as we do at the education center. As we know, in the event of an emergency, a lot of times people are talking over each other. When everyone has radios, everyone wants to get their 2 cents in. And that can be very challenging during a crisis. So by limiting the amount of people who have those radios to the people that really need them on a regular basis or need them in the event of a crisis, that's something we're also going to be evaluating with Brian. So in doing that, one of the other things we're going to evaluate is the StarCom radios. We purchased 50 of the StarCom radios, and for those of you that have them, you probably haven't really touched them. In fact, some of you wrote post-it notes on it that said don't touch, because you're afraid to use it because it is truly for a major crisis. Yeah. And we have determined that we have more than we really need. And we've already talked to our service provider for radios who's informed us that NIU is potentially, and I haven't talked to NIU myself, is potentially changing over to all StarCom radios. That being the case, we're going to investigate the option of would they like to work through a resale, look to purchase some of our StarComs, limit the number we have, and then potentially get a credit through our radio provider towards the purchase of these replacement radios. So that's just another piece that we're looking to potentially do to try to reduce the cost of these radio replacements. We put together a schedule that was in your board packet to show kind of the schedule we're looking to do. Today, we're just starting on this, and radios are pretty new to Connie, except as a user, as a principal. So we're going to be working together to get everything, get everyone educated in the room in regards to what we need to do. And then we're going to start meeting with vendors. We need to meet with vendors and principals pretty quick, because this time frame means we need to have a board recommendation approved and in place and radios in our hands the latest by December 1st, because then we need to train our staff and make sure we've collected every single ICOM in this district to not have that risk of somebody inadvertently keys it up after. the
Can we make sure the batteries are out of those? That might be the safest bet.
I just want to make a couple comments on this, Tammy. We want to make sure we have a plan that ensures safety at each school. To ensure that we don't overbuy, I think before I vote to approve these, I mean, we need to have protocol, process, who needs them, why they need them. So a plan needs to be developed thoroughly, because I don't think that's been done in the past. And that's why we overspend, and that's why we get ourselves in these positions. So we need to be very explicit about that before we move forward, because we dealt with this last year on an emergency basis, and here we are again. So I'm a little frustrated, but I'm not blaming anybody here. But it's time that we get our act together and put together a good process and protocol for this. Michael?
How much do we have allocated in the 2012-13 budget for these funds?
Yes. Actually, we need to take a look at just what those needs are. There's not just a simple line item per se for it. We have money through life safety that some of our operational and maintenance projects could shift to, which would free up some money in O&M to pay for this.
So we're not going to see the deficit grow from the purchase of these funds?
No, it's a shifting of dollars, but truly, as Tammy had said, we need to, I think, listen to what our principals' needs are, but they also need to understand, in case of an emergency, what those true lines of communications and how those true lines of communications work. And it would not be with everybody on this type of radio calling it, because that does end up being somewhat more of a tripping hazard for us than something that would expedite some clear communication. So we just need to work through those lines and protocols with everyone to ensure that there's still safety in the playgrounds and where the buses are and all of that, but limit the exposure of how many of those radios truly need to be issued.
Some more later.
Yes.
Okay.
We do plan to come back on a monthly basis and give you updates as to our progress with these vendors and with the principals and the protocols that you're talking about to get more specific on those. We do have some protocols in place, but it isn't specific as to who has radios within the buildings.
Any other questions for Tammy or Andrea? Okay, thank you. Next item on our business finance is approval of the contract for the Convocation Center for use of Husky Stadium. I think that means we're the home football team this year. It's a very detailed contract, 25 pages, so NIU's got everything covered. Do we have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Jessica Lyons?
Yes.
Tom Mateo?
Yes.
Mike Burdick?
Abstain.
Casey Williams?
Yes.
Nina Fontana?
Yes.
Michael Ward?
Yes.
Motion passes. New business administration, teacher on special assignment for a technology position. I think Dr. Moeller is in charge of this, but he's on vacation this week. So this is an information item only. Andrea, you want to give us a brief, just update what was in our packet?
Actually, a big component of, as we discussed, all the technology that has been infused and introduced to all our classrooms, one missing link is to have the staff development to build that proficiency on all of this great equipment. Through some grant money is how some dollars need to be reallocated and shifted to cover this. However, in doing that, there's a cause and effect. So while we like to take this position and have our Title I and our Title II grant pay for it, it leaves us still having to expend additional money for an additional teacher outside of the budget right now. So what we had proposed would have to be altered again, because that would mean that we still need to add on one additional FTE. But in doing that, again, it's in hopes that when this person would come on, that person within our organization would build that capacity for our teachers to really access and capitalize on the equipment that we've spent so much money on putting in the classrooms for them.
I just want to add a little bit. Dr. Moeller's been working with Kathy Gerke on this, and this has been an issue pending for many years regarding how to use Title II grant monies. And there are very specific guidelines that Kathy knows very, very well on how we have to utilize that money. And Dr. Moeller, if he was here, he would say that he probably felt that we were being a little wishy-washy trying to cover some of our costs by saying we reduced class sizes and paid for 3 FTE. And his proposal is to use the Title II grant for at least this one position for professional development, which is what Title II grant dollars you're required to use. So, you know, possibly as we work through looking at this literacy audit, some of these things could be tied directly to the training, because we use technology for a lot of software programs that are utilized by our teachers. So hopefully we can incorporate some of those concepts if this goes through. And I know Dr. Moeller will be here enthusiastically to discuss it again if you feel like you want to move forward. I think it's a good idea.
We'll talk about it more at the next meeting. Yeah, Michael?
The material that we've got, the backup material, talks about part of the reason for this came through this kind of is in respect to our goals, number 1 and number 2 we just developed within the last several months. My biggest concern isn't whether we need this. That's not my concern. We developed a lot of goals. We've got the literacy audit that Dr. Tatum provided to us tonight. I would hate to see us approve something on a first come, first served basis versus waiting until we have digested all the goals, understand how much money we have to spend towards these goals, and then allocate them appropriately. Maybe this will come out to be the number one expense that we want to have if we want to spend the money. But I'm just worried that we'll approve something prematurely. In retrospect, we could have approved something else that will give a bigger bang for our buck.
And I think that's all going to fall under Dr. Moeller's responsibilities. So I think that's a good question to ask of him when we bring it back, whether we decide to vote on it or not at that next meeting. I concur with you. Other comments? Okay. Now we're going to talk about an informational item again, a proposal for additional PBIS support at the high school, a new principal.
Yeah.
Tamara Roker.
First of all, I want to welcome Aaron to the team and express my appreciation for this administrative team. We're becoming cohesive in a short period of time. But I do want to say, since I've arrived, I have had an outpouring of the school community coming in and sharing with me what they would like to see me focus on as their school principal. I talked to teachers individually. We are actually meeting on August 16th for a luncheon. There's probably going to be close to 100 of them that are coming, not just teachers, but all staff. We're going to have a hot dog luncheon and Chicago-style hot dogs. And we're going to go into a meeting afterwards to discuss student behavior. What I'm finding, there's 2 areas that I really want to focus on, and broad areas, and that would be the college, or not college, but post-secondary readiness. So a lot of my goals are going to fall under that major goal. But the other one is student behavior. It seems to be a common theme that keeps emerging from the stakeholders that I'm talking to, teachers, students, parents. I do have a parent group coming in tomorrow night. There's about 20 parents that are going to come and talk to me. And we're going to discuss the post-secondary readiness and what we're doing as a school, but we're also going to discuss student behavior. There seems to be a concern that often we're in a triage mode because we don't have a lot of administrative support to work with the kids on some of the issues that are coming up. If we don't have high expectations for the kids, and I believe that the staff has high expectations, but in order to enforce those expectations, the kids are getting the wrong message. They're getting a message that their behavior is acceptable because they're not getting consequence for inappropriate behavior. When I talk to the students and the staff and parents so far, I put down some of the areas that we want to address. And their dress code disrespect, bullying is what the students said. This is what the students said. I went into 2 juniors and 2 senior classes over the summer school. And I said, if you had to identify 3 behaviors, what would it be? And this is what they came up with. And they said, thank you. I know exactly what you're talking about, because they recognize that we could be doing better with addressing some of their behaviors. So what I did is I put some information here about the enormous amount of referrals. And I would like to see us be more proactive than reactive. And what we're doing is we just keep putting a Band-Aid on, because we have 1,750 students in this school. If you look at what the schools compared to us in size and demographics on the second page, the support they have to enforce discipline, that speaks loudly to that we could use some extra support. So what I was proposing is, we had a 1.0 science teacher leave last year, and because of the numbers, we have a 0.6 being hired. So I was hoping that maybe we could reallocate that 0.4 and have one of our teachers do a 0.6 teaching and a 0.4 dean position in the afternoon to give us some extra support. And this team is we're gonna work very hard to come up with procedures so that we can have the highest expectations for our kids and help them understand that we have these expectations because we care about them. And I think it's doable, that we're going to be able to get it back on track. It's just that we need as much support as we can get. And I think we're a little light right now, based on what I hear and what I see.
Questions for Principal Roper? Is there a consensus to bring this back for further discussion, to take action on, or non-action on at our next meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I get a staff? I'd like to know, what do you have in your school, personnel-wise? How many of who? Because you're looking at 1750, you do 1 principal per every 5 is the 500. I'd like to know, before I approve this, I would like to see a complete demographic of your staff to make
If
sure
you
the
look at
organization
the
is
second page, I did a breakdown of like schools as far as
well, no, not like schools, but just our school. I would just like to see that, period. And I'm talking all encompassing, being from your ADs to how many secretaries to how many. I would like that. I don't know if everyone else
this is the whole
needs to see
administrative
that.
team right here, and with the addition of and the AD as well. So this is the entire administrative team for a building of 1,750 kids. And we don't have department chairs evaluate. And if you look at these other schools, every one of these schools have department chairs that evaluate teachers. So we also evaluate 150 teachers. So I think that's what the...
And if you're looking for something more specific, I mean, you want to talk to...
Yeah, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it does or not, Jessica.
As far as teachers,
no, it's fine. I will go to Briscoe to find out
yeah.
exactly.
But
what
does
it is
that make
I'm
sense to
looking
you
for.
if you look at this chart on the back?
I see the chart. I understand it. I am comparing it to other districts. And I'm also looking at national trends, and I'm looking at the numbers, especially with the fiscal crunches that's going on, and what other districts are doing to make sure that they can still adhere. So that's where some of my questions go with job duties and things like that, like who's doing what in order, before we approve
all the names.
someone else, looking at our budget. I understand you need the support, but I would like to just do an internal audit just to question, like, what is everyone doing job-wise?
Okay. See you next meeting. The next item under new business administration is release of closed session minutes for public inspection. I'd like to table this after reviewing those minutes because of some corrections that I believe need to be amended in our records. So this is an information item only tonight anyway, so is there concurrence?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Any other specific items for, excuse me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank Vicki. She worked
Oh, that's
nervously at, she, for this, we have it pretty easy in terms of, we moved to board docs, which, you know, a lot of people here are pretty savvy with technology, but it's new, and she had to do all the work to input that so you as a community could access your part, the board could access their part, the administration could access their part. And so it was just a lot of work, and I just want to personally thank her. I know she was nervous about tonight, and I think we made it.
Talk about technology savvy. John Ray started laughing because John and I go back many years where we worked together, and he knew I was the most untechnological guy in the world. Right, John? Yeah. Thanks, John. Okay, any items for our agenda building this evening? Seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you.
You gotta go to a birthday party. You gotta get a birthday drink at least.
I gotta go take
Did
my
you
wife
get
out.
these?
No, I haven't done that yet.
Well, Cohen,
Tell Karen happy birthday.
I will.
Happy 39.
I told her 8:30 would be my goal. It's not too
No,
bad.
you told her.
Hey, Dave, how are you? Good.
Do you mind if I record? No.
Nope, that's fine. I try to do my best.
So the tentative budget doesn't really seem like the tentative budget. The board decided to initially approve tonight. Doesn't seem to have any kind of new caveats to it. We're still expecting the transportation reimbursement to be down 300,000. We still don't really know what the state is going to do in regards to pensions.
Yeah, I think we'll learn a lot on August 17th, and then we'll make a determination at that time. Quite frankly, there's probably not a whole lot more we can do from a cutting perspective for this school year, so we'll keep our fingers crossed that it doesn't get any worse.
Would you mind speaking as to how the $21 million construction grant kind of fits into the overall budget perspective? I guess I'm not really sure. Like,